toward the end of the season of Easter, we've flipped back a few pages in John's Gospel to the final days of Jesus' earthly ministry, before Easter, before Holy Week even. Here he is saying goodbye. He's preparing his disciples. He is leaving instructions. And I think what we heard this morning is breathtaking. Because Jesus, divine as he is human, is so vulnerable. I see an image of Jesus taking his heart and holding it in his hands and presenting it to us. His real, bodily, beating human heart. Fragile as it is strong. And he is saying, I chose you. I count you as my friends. I love you. Please choose me. Please be my friend. Please love me. And then, please do the same for others. Now that last one about loving others probably shouldn't have been a please, because it is a commandment. A commandment to love one another. But before Jesus commands his friends and commands us to love, he tells us that he loves us. He invites us to abide in that love. Jesus tells his disciples in the wake of what he knows is coming, state violence, death, and danger, not to shut down and lock those hearts away, which would be easy to do, but to show love to others, to be public and open and vulnerable with our hearts. This week, I watched as young people were public and open and vulnerable with their hearts on college campuses across the country. Setting aside whether we agree with their methods or their demands, I believe that most of these young hearts are full of painful and overflowing love for others, for innocent people, for children, sick and injured and dying, that they are seeing on their screens, that they are reading about, that they are hearing from every single day. These young people, I would argue, have the same wisdom I believe members of every generation have had at 18 and 19 and 20. They know that this is wrong and this feels bad. And they see it spinning out of control, and they are wondering why the adults in the room aren't stopping it. Why the adults in the room aren't holding our own beating, loving hearts in our hands. But this is the pattern of generations, isn't it? Young people have the fresh hearts and lack of life experience to know that senseless violence and war are simply, I'm afraid, to be expected. And so they take their hearts out of their chests and they sing a new song. And what we do with those hearts and that song, how we respond, that matters. I will be candid. I am deeply concerned by the use of armed police forces to respond to these students' hearts. Back in my simple, by comparison, college days of the early 2000s, in the state of Ohio, we were taught about what happened just 2 hours away at Kent State University 54 years ago as of yesterday. 4 unarmed students were killed and 9 unarmed students were wounded by the Ohio National Guard in the wake of protests opposing the expansion of the Vietnam War into Cambodia. The church bells on my campus rang out each May 4th to remember the dead. And our professors assured us those days were behind us. That would never happen again. They would not let that happen again. Young, vulnerable hearts would be, at the very least, safe. Have we forgotten? I don't know. During my college years, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, this country was rolling fast into the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it seemed like my country was responding to senseless deaths with more senseless deaths. The first protest sign I ever made was to stop those wars. But of course, those wars rolled on ahead anyway, and that war in Afghanistan that started when I was a 20-year-old college kid, it didn't end until I turned 40. And it did not end well. And I have to say, we saw that end coming. We saw it at 18, 19, 20 years old. We saw it. And it looks like this generation, like those that came before, also know how this ends. And also long to stop that ending. I wonder, even if it was not through public activism or demonstration or protest, I wonder what your hearts knew then. I wonder what your hearts longed for. I wonder what your hearts will know. Wonder what your hearts will long for. What do your vulnerable hearts long for now? It is certainly not my place to demand that people in positions of power hold a certain opinion or agree with these students, nor am I suggesting these students have universally pure motives. This is never true with any group of people. But I have been surprised by what feels to me like a lack of tenderness toward the love for others that is motivating so many in this movement. And so I wonder, as followers of a vulnerable, loving God, if we might be called to provide some of that missing tenderness at home and in the public square. For me, it might be as simple as saying out loud that I am also horrified by the pictures I see on my screens. that my heart is not so calloused over that it doesn't hurt. That I cry for these children in Gaza, these parents, these doctors, these aid workers, and on and on and on. That processing constant violence in the world hurts me too. Episcopal News Service reported this week that our Episcopal College chaplains are practicing this tenderness already on many campuses across the country. They're leading ministries that are caring for students and providing water and food, reminding them to sleep, protecting, advocating for, promoting peace, counseling, praying for, and simply listening and seeing. More tender responses to these student movements, ones that do not involve force, do seem to be possible. Brown University, Evergreen State College, Northwestern University, Rutgers University, and UC Riverside are just some of the schools who have successfully engaged with and talked to and reached agreements with student protesters. These students will remember this. They'll remember, as I do, those days over 2 decades ago, so vividly. They will remember the adults in the room who saw that they had removed their hearts from their chests and who met those hearts with tenderness instead of derision or blunt force. And they will remember the church, those chaplains and other leaders driven by our vulnerable God's message that showed them respect and love. And my hope is, having been shown that love, that their hearts will live to love another day. Will live to go out from a Holy Week time into an Easter time and back to a Holy Week time and on through this life of ours. And through it manage to maintain their ability to obey the sacred command that Jesus gives us today to love one another. My prayer is that I, may have the strength to follow that commandment. Not to shut down and lock away our hearts, which is so easy to do, but to show care and tenderness and love for one another, the vulnerable love of Jesus.
eternally begotten of the Father,